Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today on Masechtas Nedarim daf Mem Beis. We're going to begin on the very top of Mem Beis Amud Aleph by the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, "Hamuder hana mechavero." So a person made a neder against his friend, but he did it with shvius before the 7th year, in which all produce eventually becomes hefker. But he did this before that. So any yard lotoch sedehu. First of all, we do not allow this person to even go into his field. Why not? So this Duran says, Shel Ma'adir, the mudar asr fil derisas haregel kadol el. We saw previously in Daf Lamed Beis that the din is that you can't even go into the person's property. They even asred that. And therefore, this is the same Tana that holds again this person is not allowed to even enter in this person's property. Not only that, ve'enu oichel min hanotos, he's not allowed to eat from these different fruits which are like overhanging, and therefore there's a prohibition on everything. However, with Shvius, we're going to have to understand why in Shemitah, because Shemitah everything is hefker. So if a person made a neder only once it was already Shvius, and says you can't derive any hanaf from, let's say, any of my things, my fruits, which again is hard to understand because they're not really his, they're hefker, they're ownerless. So therefore, nonetheless, any yard l'toch sedehu, we'll have to understand why that's the case. That he's not allowed to go into the person's property. Hanotos, he certainly is allowed to still eat from these overhanging fruits. Because again, it's hefker. So therefore, the fact that he made this neder on Shemitah, it's not going to help as far as the eating of the fruits, because they're not his. The question is, so then, why are they not allowed to go into the person's field? Okay, we'll have to understand that in the Gemara. And then the Mishnah says, Nadar himenu machol lifnei shvius. So let's say he specified, and he said food before shvius. So yodotoch sedehu, since he only said food, so therefore that does not include going into the person's property. That's allowed. He can't eat from the fruits. He can go on Shemitah. The fact that he said only Michael, that's not something which could be Chal on Shvius. Okay. And Rashi actually says over here, Hanotos, the Osan Paris, Hanotin Chutzel Sada, those fruits that are hanging outside of the field, Shilkolikach Mehem, he could have taken them in Sarchachanas Pesach Sedehu. The Gemara is actually going to say this, that it's not necessary for him to go into your property. So even though something which is hefker, you can't say, oh, my fruit's hefker, but you can't go on my property. No. Obviously, they can go into your property. But if it's referring to fruits that are dangling on the outside of the border of your property, so then they don't have a right to go into your property because they don't need to in order to get those fruits. Rabbi Shmuel, so Rabbi and Shmuel, they both say, Nechasim Elu, if a person says Elu, these possessions, which is mashma, a language, alecha, upon you, forever, there should be a neder upon you. So if shvius, before shvius, if you made this neder, again, enu yard lotoch sedehu, can't go into your property, which is how he's explaining our Mishnah. If you use this language in the chasim elu, so that's the din. Okay. Afal pi, even though shehagia shvius, so even though shvius came, it doesn't make a difference. Since it's still perus elu, since he said these fruits, it's still elu, it's still these. So even though Shemitah came and it's hefker, but before shvius, since he said this and he was speaking of elu, these fruits, so therefore they're still elu, it's still these fruits, even though it's hefker, but it was chal from before. That's the idea behind this. However, im shvius nadar, if he made a shvius already he made a neder on shvius, then ein yodotoch sedehu, as we said, he won't be able to go into your field, but abel oichel min notos, he can still eat from the hangings. So that's what Rav and Shmuel both say. Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish, they argue and they say nechase alecha. If you say not nechasim elu alecha, but nechasai alecha, my assets, while they are still mine, that's what we're talking about. Lifnei shvius ein yard lotoch sedehu ein oichel min notos. Hagia shvius, when Shemitah comes, any yard lotoch sedehu, can't go into the field. Notos, since it's no longer mine. So that's the reason why. According to him, he says that because it's not mine, so that's the reason why. And the whole reason there's an isser is only because you said nechase alecha, my assets. But if they're not mine because it's shemitah, so they're no longer my assets. So Rabbi Shmuel Savai, maybe Rabbi Shmuel they hold adam oiser davar sheb'shuso. If a person can aser something which is in their possession, even after it leaves the rishus. So if Rav Yochanan Savri and adam oiser davar sheb'shuso l'shiyetz rishusho. So if you look in the Ran, kishiagia shvius, when shemitah comes, it's kind of somewhat mutter. Can't go into a person's field. Mishum da'ara akati b'shusikayim. It's still this person's property. And he, again, let's say we're talking about fruits on the border that he could have taken. If you'll hachi peri sharu, you can take the fruits. Even though he made this neder at the time, it was in his rishus, but maybe he's no longer allowed anymore to be able to have that chal on the parish shvius, because again, it passed. So when shvius comes, it's no longer in your rishus. But when you made the neder before shvius, it was still yours. So maybe that's gufa the machlokas, whether you could do such a thing to aser something even after it's no longer in your rishus. But tizbra, does that make any sense? Do you think there's a person that says that ein adam oyser, a person cannot do such a thing? If that would be the case, if there would be a machlokas, then why does it have to mention the case of nechasai, that it's my possessions? Just say a bigger chiddush, that even if you said elu, their fruits are still here, that they argue even in that situation. No. So it must be really that everyone agrees that you could aser. And furthermore, I'll show you that again. We see elsewhere that a person is able to do this. They can aser something which they have control over now, even though in the future they won't. Not as we see. For example, a person says to their son, that a person says, you're not going to get any hana from me. Meis Yereshanu. So when he dies, so the reality is he can still be Yarish, because when he made this neder, at that point, says Rashi, the last Rashi, shall also love el kolzman shenachasim shaloi. He was only making this declaration as long as they were still his. Lapikach Yereshanu, and therefore after the person dies, you don't own anything when you die, so therefore it goes to the children. If let's say he said b'chayv moisoi, which he was even more specific, and he said even in my death, as we continue mem beis my beis, then that depends, because imeis lo yerishenu. In that situation, if he dies, he cannot be yerish. So again, we see clearly that we see that this is the situation, that there's no machlokas over here. That we see clearly over here, a person can aser something, a davar sheb'shuso, l'kashiyitzim reshuso. So even though he died, it's still, and it's no longer in his rishus, it's still usher to his children. No shani hacha de ka'armeli b'chabamoso. That may not be a raya, because he was so specific, and he said that I don't want you to be basically I don't want you to be yarshit. So we're going to listen to the divrei hames. But maybe in fact it is a machlokus, and not everyone agrees that just because you were able to answer something while it was in rishus, maybe you can't do it afterwards. For example, again, when the dinim of shvius, mikol makom kasha, then it's still kasha. Well, why do they talk about the machlokas there? It should just say even by elu, elu b'nechasim elu kol yamol plegi. Certainly, if you say these fruits, so you're being specific, these fruits, so that it works. Everyone holds that even though it's shemitah, since these are still the fruits, doesn't matter that they're hefker, these are the same fruits that you asered before. So therefore, if you said the lashon of elu, everyone agrees that it works. Ki pligim nechasai. You say it's my nechasim. So maybe once shemitah comes, it's no only nechasai. So Rabbi Shmuel Savri, It doesn't matter what language you use, still the din is the same. The adam oiser, the person can still do so. No. Nechasim elu, when it comes to nechasim elu, then adam oiser. However, nechasai ain't adam oiser, since it's not nechasai, it's not yours anymore. Okay. So maybe they agree when it comes to elu, they only are chayil when it comes to nechasai. Is it really possible to say that Rav and Shmuel hold that there's no chiluk between whether you say elu or nechasai? A person says to his friend, I'm making a neder within your house. Your house. I'm saying specifically your house. Shani nichnas, I'm not going to enter it. Or sancha shani loikeach, or your field. Mace, if let's say the guy dies, so shamarcha lachar mutter, you're allowed to go into it. So we see clearly when it comes to beischa and sadcha, the din is that even though he answered it when he had dominion over it, once he no longer had control over it, it's mutter to him now. Well, by zeh, if you're specific, you said zeh like elu, shani nechnas sadazu shani loikeach mesa shamarcha lachar aser, because it's like elu. So when it comes to elu, it's the same idea as zu. That in that situation, since you're able to aser it now, it's a bershuso, even afterwards it will aser. However, we see clearly that there is a chiluk when it comes to sadcha or beischa, which sounds very similar to nechasai. Elo ki amri Rabbi Yochanan ben Shlakish ben nechasai. Rabbi Shmuel ben nechasim elu velo pligi. So it's true. They actually don't argue. According to one statement, they were talking about elu, and when you say elu, that it does work for even afterwards on Shemitah, that the fruits will be aser. However, you use language on the chasai, then it will, those fruits will be mutter after Shvias. Okay, let's just finish this daf already, and we'll see a bunch of questions. So why, if you made a neder during Shemitah, which all the fruits are hefker, so we already dealt with this. The question, this is where the answer is going to be addressed and brought down. How come we say that you still can't go in the field, but you can still eat the fruits? So ma'ishna the oichman and notos that prepared to have carrying them. They're ownerless fruit. So that's why you're allowed to eat them. When he made the neder on Shemitah, so aranami afkara, understand. So for that same logic, so he should be able to take the fruits and go into the field. So what do you mean he can't go into the field? So the Gemara gives two answers. One we already saw, that the trees are standing by the border. So since the fruits could therefore be taken while not entering into the field, so you're not allowed to enter the field. But you're right. If we're talking about fruits that are in the middle of the field, there's no other way to get to them, so you certainly are allowed to get to them. However, we're talking specifically a situation where you don't have to go into the person's field. So if you don't have to go into the person's field, then you shouldn't do so. This is a totally different reason, similar to what we talked about when it comes to Birka Cholim. The issue is that you may delay in staying there for longer periods of time. So let's look at a couple of these rounds. The lilkait ilana shebe'emsa hasada. When it comes to gathering fruits, which are in the middle of the field, then mutter leirid l'tocha. You certainly want to go in there. But if you have fruits that are mamash on the border, the only reason why the land is hefker, is only so you have the physical ability to get to those fruits. However, if you're able to get to those fruits because they're right on the border, so then you're not to go into the field. So he said the other potential is skipping to the last line in the Ran. So over here, the issue is that let's see the whole Ran. So it's interesting. According to this shot, you shouldn't even be able to get the fruits that are in the middle of the field. Then he did Medina Shari, the Arachman Afkare Mishim Gezera Osir. So even though the truth is the land is your hefker for you to get those fruits, but because of exer, you may stay there longer and get hana being there. That's aser. Shmuel. So he wasn't going to say that there's the potential that you may stay there longer, visiting this person beyond the scope of the mitzvah. The whole gzer was you sitting there to visit, which will end up being more extensive, and the mitzvah is only standing. You should actually usher him to even stand to visit the person at all. Typically, when a person goes to visit the sick, you do it sitting. And you need to stand. So it's recognized. Why are you standing? I'm not allowed to sit. Oh, because I have to leave soon. So you're not going to be concerned of potentially staying longer than you're supposed to. There's no hecker if you're standing. How else are you going to gather the fruits? You're standing. You're not sitting while you gather the fruits. Therefore, over there, it is shaykh to be concerned of Shema Yisha. Okay, we're going to stop here. Let's see a bunch of questions. Question 1. Ha'im yochol adam l'asar al chaveru nechasav l'achar shiyatzim reshuso o li'achar moso. So a person are you allowed to make something aser, possessions, after it's already left the reshus. So yochol aser hein l'achar shiyatzim reshuso the hein li'achar moisai. So we said, as we saw over here on the previous Talmud, that a person is able to aser davar reshuso l'kashiyetza reshuso. Question 2. Hamoider hana, etc. V'shmias enu yodatach sedeu. Kasha, the Rachman Afkari Milo Yayirid. Why aren't you allowed to go into this person's field? So we said either because that the fruits are mamish at the gvul, at the border, and therefore, since you could have gathered them outside, you can't go and collect them in the field, or gzer shemi yishabamida. The potential that you may end up staying there longer than you should. TA 17. Let's look at this question. Maybe a similar question. Heichen gazru shem yisha b'yeshiva. Where do we make exer that maybe you're going to sit? This is actually the wrong. The heichen gazru shem yisha b'amida, which is here. Umatam hachilk b'nehem. So one is over here. There's no hecker. Over there is a hecker, because once you're standing. Okay, let's see how he writes it. Again, gozru shem yishem yeshiva. V'lo gozru b'amida t'kivan derech le'eshev havi hakira v'lo asi l'ishayis b'amida. However, umeshmias, what you do is you gather fruits, and therefore that's the way you do it. You don't do it sitting, so therefore there's no hecker by the fact that you're standing. So that is again mostly the Ran which we just encountered. So let's just make sure that we have that all written down. Okay, so that is the TA 17. It's totally if there's a hecker or not. TB 18. Why can't you go into this person's field? So similar to what we saw before in question 2. Let's see what I wrote. If the tree is right by the border and he could pick the fruits without having to go in the field, so lo yod lo tarch. If he delays and stands on the field for an extended period of time, this is a concern. Adkan.